you want to quickly test something on your Kubernetes cluster. Unfortunately, it is not readily available. At the same time, you don't want to go through all the complex setup of Kubernetes cluster. So, what is your option now? Hello and welcome to Play with K8s. So before you watch this video, it is required to have a basic understanding of what is Kubernetes and containers. So, without any further delay, let's take a look at the things you will be learning as part of this video. First part focuses on discussing what is Play with K8s and what it does. In second part, we focus on reviewing demo we actually about to do on live. In this, I'll show you how you can create Kubernetes cluster, configure Kubernetes master, and then configure Kubernetes worker node, and finally deploy and test application on Play with K8s. In part 1, we'll discuss about what is Play with K8s and what it does. So Play with K8s website provides a Kubernetes playground. This is similar to Play with Docker, and this will give you a configured environment to start playing and exploring Kubernetes API. And this will allow you to use and learn Kubernetes entirely within from your own browser. So this is without installing anything. And this is provided by Docker and created by tutorials. This website came to live around mid-2017. And this is still in initial stage when compared to Play with Docker website. But yes, there is a large community around this website who are actively working on its improvements. In case if you want to use this website, you are required to have either GitHub or Docker account. So once you log into this website, you will see how easy it is to create Kubernetes cluster. It actually takes about not more than 60 seconds to configure the Kubernetes master node and add 2 Kubernetes worker node to the Kubernetes master. However, you can't just create the cluster and forget about it. There is a clock ticking. You have a 4 hours time limit once you start the session. So watch out for it. Again, 4 hours is pretty good amount of time if you want to just try out something out quickly. So that's a high level overview of Play with K8s website. And these playgrounds are great for experimenting and trying out something very simple. So that's all about with Play with K8s at a high level. In short, this is Kubernetes on a website with no strings attached. Now moving on to the part 2. Now in this part 2, we will create Kubernetes cluster by adding nodes on Play with K8s website. Then we will configure one of the node as Kubernetes master. After that, we will configure the remaining nodes as the Kubernetes worker nodes and then join them to the Kubernetes master, and thus forms the cluster. Finally, we'll deploy the sample application to make sure if everything working as expected. Now, let's take a look at the UI of Play with K8s website. So once you log into that website, here is the screen you will get once you log into that site. As I mentioned earlier, there is a 4-hour time limit for every session. You can see the timer on the upper left hand side of the screen. Just below the timer, there is an option to add new instances. You can add up to maximum of 5 instances. In that case, one instance will be master and other 4 instances can be Kubernetes worker nodes. Moving on to the right hand side of the screen, on upper top corner, you can see the IP address of the instances, memory, CPU, and external IP address. Underneath that, you have an option to delete this instance. Finally, we have the screen with shell prompt, where you can execute all the commands from it. Now, let's see the steps involved in creating Kubernetes master node, and then we'll look at the Kubernetes worker node. This will be extremely simple. First, let's take a look at the master node configuration. So before we configure the master node, first we will add the new instances. Once it is done, we'll configure the node as a master node using kubadm init command. This kubadm init command will be provided at the start of your session. You can just copy and paste that init command to initialize any node as master. So after you initialize the node, the output will print the join command on the screen. So you need this join command to configure the worker nodes. I advise you to copy and securely save it at some place that you can refer it later on. So once you are done with initializing master node, then you will be configured the network plugin. This network plugin will help us establish communication between all the pods on all nodes inside the cluster. And there are various plugins such as Flannel, Calico, and Wave. So to install this network plugin, we will just copy and paste the command that was given to us at the beginning of the screen. That command will install the Wave network for us. So once you're done with initializing the master node and configuring network, your master node is now ready. And now it's time to join the worker nodes to the cluster. You can join the worker node to the cluster using kubectl join command that you are seeing on the screen. Now let's see the steps involved in creating worker node. First thing to do here is to create the new instances. If you have new instances already created and ready, all you need to do is execute one simple join command that you see on the master node. Execute the same kubectl join command on the worker node and you are all done. This join command will add this worker node to the cluster. And you can follow the same steps to add more instances to the cluster. Again, maximum number of instances that you can add or create in Play with K8's website is 8. So far we have configured one master node and one worker node. For now, let's go ahead and deploy sample application to make sure everything is working correctly as we are expecting. Currently we are on node 1, which is master node. First, let's go ahead and display the nodes within the cluster. As you can see, there are two nodes, node 1 and node 2. Here, node 1 is a master node and the node 2 is a worker node. Both are in ready status. So we are fine with that. As we have a nodes ready, then let's go ahead and deploy simple application. And you can do that using kubectl run command. Don't worry if you're not aware of that, what this kubectl run command is. We have dedicated videos on that. Just follow this course track. So once you execute this command, you can see the deployment created successfully. And let's do a final testing by displaying the pods that are created as part of above deployment. So for that, you need to execute kubectl get command to display it. As you see, there is one pod which is in running state. That's exactly we are expecting. From above all three test results, nodes inside the clusters are ready and then we successfully deployed sample application. And finally, we verified the pods are in running status. Everything looks great. Now, let's move on to the final part. In part 1, we discussed about what is Play with K8s and why we use it. Play with K8s is similar to Play with Docker, but not as mature as that. Play with K8s is still just a more than a year old product. On Play with K8's website, you can create the cluster, deploy the applications, and test it. However, there is a time limit of 4 hours. So this is basically used for learning and quick testing purpose. No software applications are required to install on your laptop to use this. So to access the Play with K8s, just type the labs.playwithk8s.com on your web browser or just simply Google it. And in part 2, we reviewed the demo we are about to perform on live Play with K8's website. First, we created the nodes which are part of the Kubernetes cluster. Then, we configured one of the node as a Kubernetes master. After that, we configured one more node as worker node and joined this worker node to the master. And finally, we deployed a sample application and tested to make sure if everything is working as expected. And that's all about with Play with K8s in this demo. And now coming up, actual demo of Play with K8s, where we will perform the exact steps that we just discussed in the review demo section. And finally, thank you so much for watching this. and hope to see you in the next video.